I used to sleep through anything. Sirens, thunderstorms, neighbors dragging furniture around at midnight like they were rehearsing for a move they never did. I slept through tension too. That was the skill that almost ruined me. I could snooze on a fault line and wake up surprised the plates had shifted. The first night the door opened at 3:03 a.m., I thought it was wind. The second night I thought I was dreaming. The third night I got up, checked the chain, and stood in the hallway with my heart beating behind my teeth, listening to a house I no longer trusted. My name is Aaron. I am 41. I work in digital forensics, which is just a fancy way of saying I'm paid to notice small things in big messes. People fly me to conferences to talk about audit trails and metadata, and then I come home and forget to notice my own life-changing color. My wife is Mara, 38, event planner, the real kind that can stop a disaster with a smile and a clipboard. If you met us at a party, you'd say we matched calm, competent, boring in the way you pray your life will be after the waves flatten out. We weren't the kind of couple that collected drama. We collected small rituals instead. On Sundays, we made pancakes. On Thursdays, she worked late and texted me a photo of the latest centerpiece she hated. Every night, we put the bolt on the door with a satisfying little click. Stable was an aesthetic we wore well. Then the house started talking back. The thermostat began resetting itself to 18 degrees at night. My alarms shifted by 6 minutes without me touching them. Music played from the living room at 2:17 a.m., a single piano note repeating like a question, and then stopped the moment I turned on the hall light. Our smart speaker cleared our shopping list twice. Mara said it was glitches. I said no system changes on the log. She said maybe a cloud sync. I said I would check. She stopped leaving her phone on the counter. The charger on her side of the bed acquired teeth. She unplugged as if power had become a liability. She started running to clear her head at hours when the night still owns the streets. Old perfume retired in favor of something sharper, citrus over stone. I noticed. I wanted to be the kind of husband who noticed without suspecting. The first thing I actually caught wasn't a text. It was a name. Kellen. It arrived in her sentences with no introduction, wearing the casual coat of a person you don't need to explain. Kellen thinks the lighting should come from the floor. Kellen says the client will buckle if we let them panic. Kellen has this theory that spaces remember the people who designed them. I nodded the way you nod when you have no idea where the story's going yet. In my head, I filed him under vendor lighting, likely dramatic. The night the door opened, I had fallen asleep on the couch with a laptop heating my legs. The bolt should have been thrown. I remember throwing it. The sound woke me the way a misplayed piano note does a familiar. But wrong. A soft click. The door drifted inward, 3 inches. Cold air braided across the floor. I stood and crossed the living room in 2 steps. The chain was still on. The bolt had been turned. My hands found both by memory and checked. The door was ajar anyway. I opened it fully, half expecting to see a neighbor, a package, a human explanation. Nothing. The hallway slept. My skin did not. I closed the door. I threw the bolt. I slid the chain. I placed the heavy brass doorstop we bought in Florence when traveling felt like a language we both spoke. I walked the perimeter of the house like a night guard. In the kitchen, the smart speaker's tiny light watched me. I told it to play white noise. It heard me and replied, "Resuming last audio." A voice filled the room. Not mine, not Mara's. A man's voice, low, amused, saying, "Leave it open. It feels like the house is breathing." I stood very still. "Stop," I said. The speaker obeyed. I didn't breathe until the tiny light went dark. Mara was asleep. I crawled back into bed and lay on my side so I could watch her face. She did not look like a stranger. She looked like the person who had saved my father's birthday by relocating it to our living room when the restaurant flooded. She looked like the person who labeled our camping bins. She looked like safety, which is the cruelest disguise. Morning brought explanations. Her phone had glitched and synced an old voice memo from some vendor walkthrough. The door must have been me half sober, or the bolt sticking the way it does in winter. The thermostat, power company update, the music at 2:17 a.m., timer she set while testing something. Everything had a tidy drawer. I am not an idiot, but I love tidy drawers. I let her file me away. I wish I could say I set an alarm on the relationship and woke up in time. Instead, I did what smart men do when they are terrified of being unkind. I made rules. No late-night runs. No phones face down. Tell me if you're seeing someone one-on-one for drinks. It's not an order, it's respect. She said, of course. She said, you're overreacting. She said, I love you, with her hand on my chest like she was checking my pulse. The evening I decided to stop being soft about data was the evening I found the business card. It came out of the laundry, a small rectangle, black with silver letters, Kellen Vaughn, Spaces Consulting. On the back, someone had written, 303 doors. If you've ever felt your stomach change seasons in 1 second, you know what I felt holding that card. It fit the drawer called Random too easily. I needed a drawer called Truth. I built myself one. I put a motion sensor behind the baseboard near the door. That kind of sensor no one sees unless they know what they're hunting. I tucked a tiny camera above the bookshelf disguised as a leaf in a cheap eucalyptus bundle. The lens looked through plastic and into our living room. I felt filthy doing it. I told myself, you are not the police. You are a husband trying not to drown. I set the alert on my phone to silent vibrate. I folded the pane very small and put it under the sink with the sponges. The alert woke me at 3:02 a.m. The camera didn't show a break-in. It showed my wife. She came down the hall in a hoodie and bare feet, flipped the bolt like she'd done it 1,000 times, slid the chain with a practiced wrist, and opened the door 3 inches. She stood there unmoving for almost a minute. Then she closed it, rebolted, and went to the kitchen. The smart speaker's light woke. She said, play him. The speaker said, resuming voice memo from Kellen. And there he was, in my house, through a machine, saying, leave it open. It feels like the house is breathing. You can be a forensics expert and still fumble your life like a child dropping a glass. I knocked a cup off the nightstand getting up. It shattered too loudly for someone who wanted to pretend he wasn't awake. Mara didn't flinch. She stood in the kitchen in that blue hoodie, listening with her eyes closed. I confronted her at breakfast as if we were 2 colleagues disagreeing about a budget. I didn't tell her about the camera. I told her about the door, the voice, the card. She said, this is becoming unhealthy. She said, you're spiraling, Aaron. She said, I'm worried about you. When a person you love gaslights you kindly, the room changes shape and you doubt your own bones. I apologized. I went to work. I stared at a timeline and all the timestamps looked like 3:03. I hired a private investigator because men like me are stupid about their own lives until money's involved. And even then, he wore beige like camouflage and had a notepad like stage props. He listened to my whole summary, nodding politely as if he'd heard this exact outline with different nouns 100 times. He said he'd be discreet. I told him I work in data. Half of discreet is not underestimating what you already know. He smiled like he didn't entirely understand me and said he'd be in touch. The PI sent me photos 4 days later. They were ordinary until they weren't. Mara and a tall guy with a face built to apologize without meaning it, leaving a building that sold fancy candles and lies. Mara laughing at a cafe table, her mouth open in a way she used to say for me. Mara and the same man at the edge of a parking lot turned toward each other, shoulder to shoulder like language in a sentence that doesn't need punctuation. No kiss, no hands. The only photo that knocked the wind out of me was a capture from our street, taken from a car, where you could see our door slightly ajar at 3:05 a.m. The guy's silhouette was visible in the vestibule, just the width of his shoulders, nothing else. The timestamp was from 3 nights before. The PI asked if I wanted him to follow them the next night. I said yes and no in the same email. My brain had divided into twins who hated each other. Mara suggested couples therapy. I said yes because I wanted help with the narrative. It's funny. We ask therapists to adjudicate facts when their job is to translate feelings. Ours had a room with soft lamps and a rug the color of oatmeal, and an ability to nod in a way that made you feel you'd been heard. We said our lines. Mara said she felt unseen. I said I felt unreal. She said the events industry is punishing. I said doors don't open themselves. The therapist said, what would safety look like for you? I said, not being told that what I know is not what I know. Mara said, "I want him back," and looked at me like the sentence itself was proof she meant it. 2 days later, the smart speaker learned a new trick. When I said, "Play morning news," it answered, "Playing saved voice memo." Mara's voice filled the kitchen. "I dreamed you were in our bed. He didn't wake up." A laugh cut through like a seam ripper Kellen's. "Did we get caught?" he said. "No," she whispered. "He would never think like that." There was a click, then the sound of lips against the speaker's tiny microphone, then delete. The device chimed, "Message saved." I called the manufacturer and asked about glitches. The guy on the phone ran through a script and recommended a factory reset. I hung up and held the stupid cylinder in both hands like it was a skull and said out loud, "Are you haunted?" It said cheerfully, "I didn't catch that." I moved to the guest room. Not as a punishment, I told myself, but as a control in an experiment. Mara stood in the doorway with her arms folded like she was cold. "You're making this feel like punishment," she said. "I am making this feel like it actually feels," I said. She slept in our bed alone. At 3:03, the motion sensor buzzed. I didn't check the feed. I stared at the ceiling and counted back from 1,000 by sevens, the way I do when I need to focus on something safe. I planned something simple, not a trap, a test. I wrote a letter handwritten, not printed, addressed to no one, folded it twice, and slid it under her car seat where the mechanics never vacuum. The letter said, "You were right about the door. He doesn't hear what houses say. Tuesday, same time. Leave the bolt." I left it there like bait, like a mirror. If she was going to tell me I was crazy, I wanted the truth to at least enjoy its reflection before it walked back into the walls. Tuesday came like Tuesdays do. Mara left for walkthroughs. I sat at the dining table with the camera feed on my laptop, the PI on standby, and the feeling in my chest of being both the hunter and the idiot who thinks the deer volunteered. At 2:57 a.m., Mara came down the hall. She wore the blue hoodie. She stood by the door. She didn't open it. She put her hand on the bolt and closed her eyes and did not move. She stood like that until 3:05. Then she turned and walked to the kitchen. She touched the smart speaker like a reliquary. "Play him," she said. It played silence. She said, "Play me." It played silence. She laughed, a small sound like a cut. At 3:11, the door opened 3 inches. Slowly. Not by her hand. The chain hung. The bolt was still thrown. Cold air slipped under my door and made my ankles remember every winter. The camera caught no silhouette. The hallway was empty and the door still opened. Mara stood facing the kitchen, back to the door, not turning. She didn't flinch. The door closed. The bolt remained. The chain remained. My practical brain broke a little. My other brain, the one that catalogs bad feelings, took a note and underlined it twice. The PI called the following afternoon. He had followed Kellen, not with Mara this time, with a woman who wasn't my wife and wasn't his wife either. Kellen, it turned out, was an equal opportunity gravity well. The PI said, trying to be careful, that there was no single line to draw from door to man. He said I might be dealing with what he called, kindly, secondary stories. I asked what primary was. He said, whatever actually hurts. I'm not proud of what I did next. I tracked Kellen down and confronted him at a coffee truck. He looked like a recently divorced advertisement, good jaw, expensive sneakers, a way of standing that suggested the ground liked him. I said my name. He said, okay. I said my wife's name. He smiled like I was offering him a sample. I don't remember everything I said. I remember one sentence. Leave my house. He laughed, the same low laugh that had invaded my kitchen. He said, your house invited me, and turned away to grab his latte like I had ordered it for him. I didn't hit him. I wished on the walk home that I had broken at least one thing his face needs. Violence would have made me feel stupid in a simpler way. Instead, I did the thing I'm supposed to be good at. I looked for patterns. I pulled the logs from our smart lock manufacturer, not the app but the service itself, and parsed nights. 3-3 wasn't just the door. It was the exact nightly refresh window for our automations, a small pause where scripts sleep and wake. If someone had set up a routine to engage welcome at 3:03, the lock would momentarily disengage the bolt to accommodate a phantom user then re-engage. It wouldn't show as a manual unlock because it wasn't. It would show as maintenance. It would look like the house had opened itself to breathe. Who had access to my admin console? Me and Mara. When had the 303 automation been added? The week Kellen became a noun in our kitchen. Where had the request come from? An IP in our house masked behind a VPN. The device name? Guest. I assembled it on a single page. The photo of Mara at the cafe, the lock logs, a transcript of the smart speaker error, a screenshot of the motion sensor graph, the business card with 303 on our doors, and a still frame of my wife in her blue hoodie, standing in front of an open door that was supposed to be closed. I waited at the table with these laid out like a performance. Mara came home early for once. She saw the arrangement and didn't touch the papers. She looked at me. She did not look scared. She looked relieved, which angered me in a brand new color I didn't know was in the palette. Finally, she said. Finally what? I asked, and my voice was not a voice. It was gravel. Finally, we can stop pretending you're the one who doesn't know how to tell a story, she said. You built the mystery you needed. You collected your clues. Now what? I wanted to say. I didn't build it. You left your fingerprints on every surface. What came out was, do you love him? She tilted her head and smiled like a teacher at the student who just now caught up to last week's lesson. I love not being invisible. That should have ended it. It didn't. She walked to the sink and turned on the tap and said, do you know what happens in this state if I tell them you're paranoid and unstable? If I tell them you installed cameras without my consent? If I tell them you're controlling? She didn't look at me while she said it. She looked at the window at the ghost of our reflections in the glass. I have spent my adult life with audit trails. I do not like being threatened with a narrative I can't control. I do not like being told that the truth is a vote and I don't have the majority. My first thought was to call a lawyer. My second was to leave. My third was to break the smart speaker against the wall and watch it crack. I did none of those, I said. I'm moving out. She blinked in a way that betrayed the smallest surprise, and I realized her plan had counted on me staying to argue a part I had not consented to play. I moved into a short-term apartment above a locksmith. The irony didn't taste like anything. The first night, I slept without the bolt performing its nightly theater. At 3:03, the building groaned in its own way, as old buildings do. I woke but didn't get up. When the ceiling didn't repeat a voice, I cried out of proportion to the evidence. The lawyer was efficient. The affair was not a matter of debate. I had proof. The manipulation of the house systems was harder to turn into human language for court. The judgment did not care about ghosts and machines, only about assets. We split them like adults. She kept the house. I let her keep it. I did not want to wonder what the doors were doing at night. 2 months later, the PI, whom I had forgotten to fire, sent me a courtesy update. Kellen had been let go from his firm. An internal complaint, a rumor about inappropriate relationships with clients, the kind of gentle collapse men like him land softly on. Mara's company posted a photo of her on a ladder, adjusting a chandelier, with a caption about resilience. Her smile was tight and professional. The blue hoodie appeared in a reflection, ghosting the glass, and made me nauseous. I kept the smart speaker anyway. It sits on my counter like a joke only I can hear. Sometimes I plug it in to play weather. Once, deliberately, I said, "Play him." The device chirped. I don't recognize that request, and I laughed so hard I had to sit down. People want a twist in a story like this. The twist is not that Kellen turned out to be married, or that he sent me an email that said, "No hard feelings, like feelings are bolts." The twist is not that Mara fabricated a spook with scripts to make me question my sanity. The twist is that I almost let her make me the unreliable narrator of my own life. Last week at 3:03 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand in my new place. For a second, my blood learned ice. I turned it over. It was a system notification from my own habit tracker app, reminding me that I'd set midnight to 4 a.m. as no decisions. That's who I am now. A man who does not decide at 3:03. A man who tells himself out loud if necessary, morning is better. I don't know if Mara misses me. I don't know if she and Kellen have turned their calamity into a routine with its own rituals. I know the house where we made pancakes does not belong to me anymore, and I don't drive past it even to hurt myself. I know that a door can be open when the lock says it's closed, and that the person you love can stand in the kitchen listening to someone who is not there, and that you will survive knowing both. There's a man on my floor who plays a trumpet on Sunday afternoons. He's either very good or I am grateful. It works out the same. On the third Sunday, he stood in the stairwell and said, "Acoustics," and pointed up at the atrium, and I nodded like he had just solved a case. I go downstairs for coffee every morning at 7, and the barista with a lightning bolt tattoo asks me how I slept, and I tell the truth more often than I lie. The locksmith is up early, always, and he waves without irony. He sells keys that promise entry if you have the right door. I am learning which doors are mine. I am learning which voices I keep in my house. I am learning that sometimes the scariest thing that happens to you is not ghosts, not conspiracies, not the lock you can't explain. Sometimes it's the person you trusted choosing to turn your reality down 2 degrees, one automation at a time, until you shiver and call it weather. When I told the therapist I was done coming in, she asked what I wanted to carry forward. I said, audit trail. She smiled sadly and said, "That sounds heavy." I said, "It weighs less than not knowing." On my last night in the old house, before the papers made our break official, I stood in the living room and listened on purpose. I opened the door 3 inches and closed it again. I unplugged the smart speaker. I left the brass doorstop on the floor where it could keep doing its simple, honest job. I wrote one note, just one, on a sticky square, and stuck it on the inside of the door at eye level. It said, "Houses don't breathe. People do." I left at 3:02 a.m. on purpose. I didn't look back at 3:03. I left the house to its scripts and the bed to its secrets and the kitchen to its recordings. I drove across a city that hadn't noticed the room I was giving back. I parked in front of my new building, carried a box up a flight of stairs, unlocked my door and locked it again. The bolt clicked, honest and small. I lay down on a mattress that hadn't learned any voices yet and slept like a man who had finally, mercifully, run out of evidence. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. It means a lot. New stories like this one are posted every single day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. And if this story touched you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find our content.